It began with smoke, but not the kind that rises gently from a cozy fireplace. This smoke clawed its way into the sky, thick and black, visible from blocks away. It carried the stench of destruction, of wood and memories reduced to char. By the time the flames died, all that was left of my home was a smoldering skeleton, leaning at odd angles as if ashamed to stand upright. The fire had been merciless, consuming everything I had built, everything I had worked for, and everything that once gave me a sense of safety. The neighborhood gathered in clusters on their manicured lawns, whispering in tones they thought I could not hear. Some pointed, others shook their heads. But most stood silently, watching me as if I were not a victim, but an exhibit. Something curious, something suspicious, something that broke the illusion of suburban perfection. At the edge of the crowd stood the woman who had made my life miserable since the day I moved in. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA, a woman who lived for rules and relished in punishments. Her eyes gleamed in the firelight, not with sympathy, but with something darker. She did not cry, she did not look shocked, and she certainly did not offer comfort. She only stared at the flames with an expression that suggested satisfaction, as if the destruction of my home somehow restored balance to the neighborhood she believed she controlled. The fire marshal spoke of electrical faults and faulty wiring, theories meant to soothe, meant to explain away the horror, but I knew better. I had kept that house in perfect order. Every inspection had been spotless, every repair documented, every outlet safe. My mind replayed the look on her face as the flames climbed higher, and for the first time, a seed of suspicion planted itself firmly in my chest. Losing the house should have been the worst part. But it wasn't. It was the whispers that followed me for days after. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even in the mailbox cluster, neighbors leaned just close enough to murmur theories. Some said it was insurance fraud. Others claimed I had been careless, leaving something unattended. The HOA woman never spoke these rumors aloud, but her silence was louder than words. She thrived on the chaos, stoking it with raised eyebrows and conveniently timed smirks. Homeless but not hopeless, I found myself living in a small rental across town, staring at boxes that held the few possessions I salvaged. At night, the images of flames haunted me. Every flicker of light outside my window sent a chill through my body. Every creak of the house made me wonder if someone was near, watching, waiting. I knew she was involved, though I could not yet prove it. Then came the first letter. Slipped. Under my temporary door, typed but unsigned, it bore the unmistakable tone of the HOA. It listed violations, absurd ones. Grass too long, mailbox unpainted, fence leaning. All impossible, since I no longer lived in the HOA neighborhood. Yet the letter claimed jurisdiction, claiming that wherever I went, I still belonged to their rules. At first, I thought it was a sick joke. But when the second letter arrived, followed by a third, I realized it was more than harassment. It was a message. I could not escape her control. The weeks dragged on, filled with tension and paranoia. Investigators closed the fire, report with the word accidental, but the unease in my chest only grew. I hired a private inspector who found traces the official team had overlooked, accelerants, unusual burn patterns, evidence that screamed of deliberate ignition. With each discovery, the shadow of my suspicion grew heavier. Still, what unnerved me most wasn't the fire itself, but the way she walked past me in town days later. Calm, smiling faintly, as though we shared a secret no one else could understand. It wasn't the smile of a neighbor. It was the smile of someone who had won, and then, just as I began to gather evidence, just as I convinced myself that I could fight back, the summons arrived. A crisp envelope bearing the seal of the county court. At first, I thought it was related to the fire investigation, perhaps even progress on justice. But as I unfolded the papers, my blood turned cold. It was not about the fire at all. It was a lawsuit filed against me. The plaintiff's name stared back at me like a scar on the page. Her name. The very woman who had stood at the edge of the firelight with satisfaction painted across her face. She was suing me for damages, for defamation, for harassment. And as I sat there, surrounded by the ashes of my old life and the remnants of the new one, I realized something horrifying. She wasn't finished. The fire had been just the beginning, and the courtroom was where she intended to finish what she had started. The papers trembled in my hands as I read each line of the lawsuit. It accused me of slandering her name, of spreading lies about the HOA, of deliberately targeting her with harassment. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. My home lay in ruins, my life reduced to smoke and ashes, and yet here I was, being painted as the aggressor. The date of the court hearing loomed only weeks away. Those days passed in a blur of stress and preparation, each one heavier than the last. I scoured through every interaction, every note I had ever kept, piecing together a defense that could prove my innocence. But the deeper I went, the clearer her strategy became. This wasn't about money, and it wasn't about her reputation. It was about control. She wanted me trapped in the very system that had once protected her. The HOA's twisted grip extended into the courtroom. Neighbors I once considered friendly now avoided me, their gazes dropping as I passed. Some even provided sworn statements against me, repeating the same narrative she had crafted, that I was reckless, irresponsible, and unstable. It was as though she had orchestrated a choir, each voice echoing her lies in perfect harmony. My attorney warned me that defamation cases were difficult to fight, especially when public opinion was stacked against me. Still, I held on to the fragments of evidence I had gathered from the fire, the burn patterns, the traces of accelerant, the inconsistencies in the official report. If I could connect her to the destruction of my home, everything else would unravel. But proving it in time for the lawsuit felt impossible. As the hearing approached, I noticed her presence everywhere. She would drive slowly past the small rental where I now lived, her car lingering just long enough to remind me she was watching. She sent letters through her lawyer demanding restitution, dripping with the same arrogance she had shown since the day I moved into the neighborhood. Each encounter chipped away at my composure, and I began to realize this wasn't simply legal maneuvering, it was psychological warfare. On the morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my heart pounding in my chest. The air smelled of old wood and paper, the kind of place where lives were quietly dismantled with pens and signatures. And there she was, waiting, her posture rigid, her smile faint but triumphant. She didn't see a courtroom as a place of justice. To her it was an arena, and I was already her defeated opponent. But as the judge called the session to order, something unexpected happened. Another file was brought forward, another case scheduled on the same docket. And when the clerk read the plaintiff and defendant aloud, my breath caught in my throat. Her name appeared again. But this time, she wasn't the one bringing the charges. This time, she was the one being accused. The courtroom, once a place of silent dread, suddenly shifted. The same woman who had dragged me here, the same woman who had watched my house burn with cold satisfaction, now stood accused herself. Her confidence faltered, if only for a moment, but it was enough for me to see it, the crack in her carefully constructed armor. The charges against her were serious: insurance fraud, harassment, and evidence tampering. Someone else had been gathering threads of her misdeeds, quietly weaving them into a net. That someone, I soon learned, was a neighbor she had wronged before, a man whose property she had fined into foreclosure, a man who had nothing left to lose. Unlike me, he had dedicated years to documenting every violation, every threat, every abuse of her so-called authority. And now, his evidence was on the record. The judge listened as both cases unfolded side by side, each one painting a picture of a woman who had used power not to protect her neighborhood, but to destroy lives. My attorney seized the moment, linking her pattern of harassment directly to my fire, pointing to the accelerant traces and the irregular burn marks. Though no one could yet prove she lit the match herself, the circumstantial evidence was enough to stir doubt, enough to break the spell she had cast over the community. For the first time, the neighbors who once avoided my gaze now leaned forward, whispering to each other, their expressions shifting from suspicion to realization. They began to see her not as their protector, but as a predator who thrived on control and chaos. She fought hard, her voice sharp, her demeanor venomous. She denied everything, deflected blame, accused everyone else of conspiracy. But the weight of evidence grew heavier with each passing hour, and the courtroom that had once felt like her stage now became her cage. When the judge finally spoke, the words rang out like a verdict on more than just paper. The lawsuit she filed against me was dismissed in full, branded as malicious and unfounded. The case against her was allowed to proceed, opening the door to deeper investigation. For the first time since the flames had taken my home, I felt a flicker of justice. She was led out of the courtroom, no longer triumphant, no longer untouchable. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, strained expression that betrayed the fear she had always tried to project onto others. The woman who once believed she could bend an entire neighborhood to her will was finally forced to face the consequences of her actions. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter. My home was still gone, my life still in pieces, but the weight of her shadow had lifted. And though I knew the fight was not entirely over, I also knew this. The fire she started to destroy me had instead consumed her. For in trying to burn me down, she had walked straight into the flames of her own making.